This is the Consolation of Philosophy by Boethius, and this is our passage. This is Lady Philosophy, the figure of philosophy speaking to Boethius. Now, what is it that is actually upsetting you and has driven you to such fits of weeping? You have had a sharp bump, and you think that Fortune's attitude toward you has changed, but you're wrong. Fortune hasn't changed a bit. She was always whimsical, and she remains constant to her inconstancy. You were wrong to take her smiles seriously and to rely on them as the basis for your happiness. Now, what you have learned is that the changing face of blind power is unreliable, and always was. Other men may not understand this, but she has revealed herself entirely to you. If you want to be one of her followers, Fortune's followers, then follow, but without complaint. If you spurn her treachery, then reject her absolutely as one who plays such games with men's lives. You blame her for your sorrows, but your heart ought to be at rest, for now that she has left you, you know not to trust her, and no one will ever feel sure that she is not going to abandon him just as she abandoned you. This is passages, text, context, and the ways to wisdom. So let's zoom way out now and look at this little animation of the Roman Empire. Notice what happens here. There's some nice Roman drum music that we've cut out for you. Okay, so we're starting at 510 BCE with the Roman Republic, and you see it's very small there in Italy. And then it grows. Republic, spreading. And then watch what happens around here. Now it becomes an empire because Caesar takes over. And then watch what happens around 410. Split. Western Roman Empire, Eastern or the Byzantine Empire, shrinking and adding. Whoops, there goes the Western Roman Empire. Goodbye. The Eastern Roman Empire actually lasts quite a while, as you can see. Right. Into the Middle Ages. All right, so this was Rome. That's the history of Rome, a brief history of Rome. An animated history of Rome, which is always nice. So what is the Rome of Boethius? This is incredibly important because it is responsible for his circumstance. So 303 to 313 of the Common Era, or you might know it as AD, is the Diocletianic persecution. Christians had been persecuted on and off during their birth in the Roman Empire as early as Nero. But it was Diocletian who really perfected the art of persecution of Christians and during this reign of terror, 303 to 313. What's interesting is that the worst moment of Christians in Rome was followed by the best moment of Christianity in Rome, the Edict of Milan by Constantine. You may know the story of Constantine. He was just another Roman emperor, and he was going into a battle where he was overmatched. And he saw, or thought he saw, a cross hanging over the battlefield, appearing over the battlefield, and he won for no good reason. And so he's like, okay, maybe this Christianity thing's there's something to it. Now, he does not, we sometimes conflate all this and say Constantine made Christianity the official religion of Rome. He did not, but he allowed for it to exist, which was huge, right? Because Remember, right before is Diocletian, and he's murdering and torturing Christians for a decade. Now Constantine, because of this unique spiritual experience, says, you know what, I'm going to let you all flourish. He doesn't say you're the official religion, but you are one of them. And that was an amazing evolution in Rome. Also, a few years later, he splits the empire, as you saw in the animation, into the western part, seated in Rome and eventually in Ravenna. And then the east, in what was Byzantium, he renames after himself, because that's what you get to do when you're a Roman emperor. So it becomes Constantinople. It was 380 when the emperor Theodosius I issues the Edict of Thessalonica, and he says, now Christianity is the official religion of Rome. This is an amazing development, and frankly, we might not even be having this discussion or have a text to talk about in terms of Christianity without this Roman emperor's edict. But we do, and he did. 410 and in 455, the Visigoths sack Rome. St. Augustine writes about it as they pour over the walls, and he realizes then that his city, which he thought was God's city, is now no longer. And in fact, that prompts him to write his tome, The City of God, where he reimagines the place of Christians as in heaven, not in Rome. So that didn't last long, did it? That was about 30 years, and then Rome falls. Twice, in fact, several times Rome falls. 476 CE, the barbarian warlord Odoacer forces Romulus Augustus to abdicate the Western Roman Empire, the Western Roman throne. So this is now a barbarian who's leading Rome. And you've probably watched Gladiator enough to know what that means, or some of the other films. This is unbelievable, unheard of. This cannot be happening. But the empire is fallen. The Christianity of Boethius during this time is also very interesting and very contentious. And I'm not going to lead you through all these councils because I don't want to. I think I can give you the gist of them. 325 CE is the first council of Nicaea. And almost all of these are about the nature of Christ. And so once you have a religion established, as in 325, remember Constantine's 313, so okay, now we can live, we can be a part of the Roman Empire. Who are we, right? It's a really interesting transition, because when you're persecuted, you know who you are. You're not them. But if you're sanctioned, approved by the government, by the state, by the empire, then you have some decisions to make. And these are not easy. I remember one time I was in Montgomery, Alabama, and I was on a radio show for something, and I was at a historically black university, and I don't know how this came up, but it was something about Christianity in America, and I said, well, you can't be a Christian unless you're persecuted, so it's only African Americans who could really activate Christianity. And the phone lines went like that. I'm like, I thought that was pretty obvious, but I guess not. It's really difficult to establish a church within the state, especially a church that is designed for the poor, for the afflicted, for the disenfranchised, that's centered on the Beatitudes, where you're told to give up not only your jacket, but your overcoat. Where you're supposed to go, if someone asks you to go a couple miles down to the Gelson's Market, you go 2. That's a terrible example. So it's not surprising this happens, right? Because if you're being persecuted, then it's about survival. And Christianity is, I would say, in its center when it's being persecuted. The founder was murdered, okay? When it becomes the established religion of the state, or an established religion, or in fact, the established religion, it changes it completely. Yes. What happens is when you're no longer persecuted and you're an established church, you got to decide what you believe. Well, there it is. Who was Jesus? Oh, well, Jesus was the Son of God. What does that mean? Well, it means he was co-equal with God. No, it doesn't. It means that God gave birth to him. What? God gave birth. And then suddenly people are arguing, and you have 14 councils mostly about that. What was the nature of Jesus? Was he truly divine? Actually, the most contentious idea was that he was truly human. You can't say Jesus was truly human. Well, in the early and contemporary Christian theology, if Jesus is not human, none of this works. So you've got all these arguments, by the way. Some of these councils are about what counts in the Bible, which books, letters, gospels, whatever count. What are we going to put in, right? There's a lot of decisions to be made when you're not running for your life. All right. So, Consolation of Philosophy was written by Anicius Manlius Severinus, or Boethius, 480 to 524, roughly. Those dates may vary a little bit. And to give you a sense of Boethius' life, I'm going to read from another text, another classic text from 1776, Edward Gibbon's The History of the Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire. You probably hate history. I hate reading historians. I like history, but I hate reading historians. You will not hate this. This is a 6-volume work of the Roman Empire that follows that whole animation I gave you and is incredibly literary. It's beautifully phrased. Well, you're going to hear. I'm going to read you some from Volume 4, which is about Boethius. So this is all Edward Gibbon, a British man. Boethius is said to have employed 18 laborious years in the schools of Athens, which were supported by the zeal, the learning, and the diligence of Proclus and his disciples. The reason and piety of their Roman pupil were fortunately saved from the contagion of mystery and magic. Oh, okay. He probably wouldn't like some of the things that we like here, just saying, which polluted the groves of the academy. See, that's good to know, right? It's like this is 1776, and they're still talking about the esoteric as something weird and dangerous. When he imbibed the spirit and imitated the method of his dead and living masters, who attempted to reconcile the strong and subtle sense of Aristotle with the devout contemplation and sublime fancy of Plato. That's it, right? If you can integrate Plato and Aristotle, you've kind of covered everything. So he studies in Athens, although scholars now think they're not sure that actually happened, but it's all right because Gibbon is telling a great story. After his return to Rome and his marriage with the daughter of his friend, the patrician Symmachus, Boethius still continued in a palace of ivory and marble to prosecute the same studies, that is, of the Greeks. The church was edified by his profound defense of the Orthodox creed against the Arian. All right, this is going to be important. The Arians believed that Jesus was not there in the beginning, that God created him, that God created his son. And this was deemed a heresy. And the Catholic unity was explained, etc. He was, I'll just let Gibbon tell you. For the benefit of his Latin readers, Boethius' genius submitted to teach the first elements of the arts and sciences of Greece, the geometry of Euclid, the music of Pythagoras, the arithmetic of Nicomachus, the mechanics of Archimedes, the astronomy of Ptolemy, and the theology of Plato, the logic of Aristotle, etc. These were translated and illustrated by the indefatigable pen of the Roman senator. So he really is a remarkable translator of the ancient Greek works, bringing them into Latin. Remember, we're talking about 480, so it's not been that long since the Greeks were writing, relatively, but they needed translations. And interestingly, it would be Muslim scholars who come along later and continue that project, in fact, save it pretty much for Europe at the end of the Dark Ages. I love the way Gibbon writes. It's so 18th century. The dignity of Boethius was adorned with the titles of consul and patrician, and his talents were usefully employed in the important station of master of the offices. Notwithstanding the equal claims of the East and West, his two sons were created in their tender youth the consuls that same year. On the memorial day of their inauguration, they proceeded in solemn pomp from their palace to the forum, amidst the applause of the Senate and the people, and their joyful father, the true consul of Rome, after pronouncing an oration in the praise of his royal benefactor, distributed a triumphal largesse in the games of the circus. Prosperous in his fame and fortunes, in his public honors and private alliances, in the cultivation of science and in the consciousness of virtue, Boethius might have been styled happy, if that precarious epithet could be safely applied before the last term of his life. You see what he's doing? He's writing a novel. How's he know there was applause? Doesn't matter, it's a great story. A philosopher liberal of his wealth and parsimonious of his time might be insensible to the common allurements of ambition, the thirst of gold and employment. My colleagues with PhDs in philosophy would agree. And some credit may be due to the asseveration of Boethius that he had reluctantly obeyed the divine Plato, who enjoins every virtuous citizen to rescue the state from the usurpation of vice and ignorance. We are to rescue the state from the usurpation of vice and ignorance. All right, then comes his fall, because there's always a fall, right? In the last gloomy season, this is Gibbon continued, in the last gloomy season of Theodoric, he indignantly felt that he was a slave, but as his master had only one power over his life, he stood without arms and without fear against the face of an angry barbarian, Theodoric, who had been provoked to believe that the safety of the Senate was incompatible with his own. What happens is, as it always happens, someone accuses something of something, and it benefits a certain person in power, and so he makes sure the machinations that need to take place do so, and a good man goes down. Gibbon again. The senator Albinus was accused and already convicted on the presumption of hoping, as it was said, the liberty of Rome from this barbarian emperor. If Albinus be criminal, exclaimed Boethius, the Senate and myself are all guilty of the same crime. If we are innocent, then Albinus is entitled to the same protection of the laws. Well, you don't really get to do that to a barbarian emperor or to any barbarian in power. And so he manufactures evidence against them, a certain forgery and certain lies, and of course, he is sentenced to death. Gibbon, again. Yet his innocence must be presumed. Boethius' innocence must be presumed, since he was deprived by Theodoric of the means of justification and rigorously confined in the Tower of Pavia. He didn't get his due diligence in court, while the Senate, at the distance of 500 miles, pronounced a sentence of confiscation and death against the most illustrious of its members. At the command of the barbarians, the occult science of a philosopher was stigmatized with the names of sacrilege and magic. A devout and dutiful attachment to the Senate was condemned as criminal by the trembling voices of the senators themselves, and their ingratitude deserved the wish or prediction of Boethius that after him, none should be found guilty of the same offense. And so, Gibbon continues, while Boethius, oppressed with fetters expected each moment of the sentence or the stroke of death, he composed in the Tower of Pavia the Consolation of Philosophy, a golden volume not unworthy of the leisure of Plato or Tully, but which claims incomparable merit from the barbarism of the times and the situation of the author. So true. The celestial guide, Lady Philosophy, whom he had so long invoked at Rome and Athens, now condescended to illumine his dungeon, to revive his courage, and to pour into his wounds her salutary balm. And then he was executed. From the earth, Boethius ascended into heaven in search of the supreme good. He was a Platonic philosopher, so supreme good is a Platonic form. Explored the metaphysical labyrinth of chance and destiny, of prescience and free will, of time and eternity, and generously attempted to reconcile the perfect attributes of the deity with evening, the apparent disorders of his moral and physical government. Suspense, the worst of evils, was at length determined by the ministers of death, who executed and perhaps exceeded the inhuman mandate of Theodoric. A strong cord was fastened around the head of Boethius and forcibly tightened till his eyes almost started from their sockets. And some mercy may be discovered in the milder torture of beating him with clubs until he died. But he survived, and I love this word, survive. It means means in this case over, to overlive, to live beyond. He survived. Gibbon, his genius survived to diffuse a ray of knowledge over the darkest ages of the Latin world. The writings of the philosopher were translated by the most glorious of the English kings. And so, yes, his work, the translations he did, carried over through the Dark Ages, what we now call the Dark Ages, and were the basis of some of the Renaissance, because the Renaissance was about reconnecting with the classical age. And then an ugly and interesting last part of the story here. In the last hours of Boethius, he derived some comfort from the safety of his two sons, of his wife, and of his father-in-law, the venerable Symmachus. But the grief of Symmachus, his father-in-law, was indiscreet. His grief was indiscreet and perhaps disrespectful. He had presumed to lament he might dare to revenge the death of his friend and son-in-law. He was dragged in chains, Symmachus, from Rome to the palace of Ravenna, where Theodoric still reigned, and the suspicions of Theodoric could only be appeased by the blood of an innocent and aged senator. Welcome to Rome. It's pretty rough. And here's the ending of this story. After a life of virtue and glory, Theodoric was now descending with shame and guilt into the grave. And I think Gibbon wants you to compare this death with the death of Boethius. Shame and guilt into the grave. His mind was humbled by the contrast of the past and justly alarmed by the invisible terrors of futurity. One night, as it is related, when the head of a large fish was served on the royal table, he suddenly exclaimed that he beheld the angry countenance of Symmachus, his eyes glaring fury and revenge, and his mouth armed with long, sharp teeth, which threatened to devour him. The monarch instantly retired to his chamber, and as he lay trembling with aguish cold under a weight of bedclothes, he expressed in broken murmurs to his physician, Elpidius, his deep repentance for the murders of Boethius and Symmachus. His malady increased, and after a dysentery, which continued 3 days, he expired in the palace of Ravenna in the 33rd, or perhaps the 37th year of his reign. That is the context. Now let's get into the text. This is the opening of Book 1, which I think is the most beautiful part of the whole work. The work is, it's 5 books, and I think there's about 29 poems in it. So it's one of those wonderful collections where it's prose and poetry together. And this is not unlike the Greek drama where the chorus might serve here as the poetry. Here is Boethius, the man you've been hearing about. Here's his voice. I used to write cheerful poems, happy and life-affirming, but my eyes are wet with tears, and the poems are those that only grieving muses would prompt me to compose. Heartbreaking verse from a suffering, broken man. Remember what's happened. He was a Roman senator. He was beloved and brilliant, and he was lied about and considered a traitor and put in jail, and he's now waiting for his execution. So he writes this while he's waiting to die. These woeful songs turn out to be my consoling companions. These glories of my young manhood have lately become the comforts of old age that has come upon me too soon, as the burdens of anguish add to those of my years. My hair is prematurely gray, and my skin hangs loose on a poor, precious frame. To the young, death is a threat to their pleasures, but now I'm worn down and out, and it offers at last a remission of all my pains. It is cruel, paying no heed to my imploring cries, and will not deign to close my weeping eyes. In my salad days, I was rich, and whimsical fortune smiled for a little while, but then she turned away that faithless face of hers, and my bitter life drags out its long, unwanted days. My fair-weather friends admired me, paid me compliments, and envied my luck, but now they see how my foothold was uncertain. Lady Philosophy appears. I was writing this in a silence broken only by the scratchings of my quill as I recorded these gloomy thoughts and tried to impose them upon a certain form that in itself is curiously anodyne, when there was a presence of which I gradually became aware, looming over my head. The figure of a woman whose look filled me with awe. Her burning gaze was indescribably penetrating, unlike that of anyone I've ever met. And while her complexion was as fresh and glowing as that of a girl, I realized that she was ancient, and nobody could mistake her for a creature of our time. It was impossible to estimate her height, for she seemed at first to be of ordinary measure, but then, without seeming to change, she appeared to be extraordinarily tall, so that her head all but touched the heavens. I was certain that if she had a mind to stretch her neck just a little, her face would penetrate the skies, where it would be utterly lost to human view. Her dress was a miracle of fine cloth and meticulous workmanship, and as I later learned, she had woven it herself. But it had darkened like a smoke-blackened family statue in the atrium, as if through neglect, and was dingy and worn. I could see worked into the bottom border the Greek letters pi for practice and the slightly higher theta for theory and practice, with steps that were marked between them to form a ladder by which one might climb from the lower to the upper. Some ruffians had done violence to her elegant dress, and clearly bits of fabric had been torn away. In her right hand, she held a few books, and in her left, she carried a scepter as she noticed the muses of poetry. She expels next the muses, tells them to get out. Now, we've talked a little bit about the muses here. These are not the same muses that we talked about. The oldest imagination of the muses, where they are really before Zeus and before everything. They are, well, not before Zeus, but they are memory and mind. They of the memory mind. Sorry, let me back up. Zeus is mind. The muses are memory. So the combination of mind and memory creates the world. The muses are part of the creation of the world in ancient Greece. They're incredibly important and incredibly powerful. But now, Lady Philosophy, this is a wonderful image of intellectual history. Lady Philosophy now dispels them. Go away, muses. I have work to do here, and you can't do it. Because the muses are helping him wallow in his sorrow. This is what the muses do. They become really the muses of sad poetry, of which there's a lot in this text. And now Lady Philosophy, no doubt Sophia is her name, addresses Boethius. Are you the same person who was nourished with my rich milk and fed on my diet as you were growing up? Did I not prepare you with weapons as you could now use in your difficulties if you had not chosen to discard them? Do you even recognize me? Answer me. Are you silent because you're ashamed? Or are you just dumbstruck? I'd rather that it was shame. But I'm afraid that you're merely and deplorably stupefied. At this point, seeing that I was speechless, she laid her hand on my chest and said, he is in no real danger. He merely suffers from a lethargy, a sickness that is common among the depressed. He has forgotten who he really is. But he will recover, for he used to know me, and all I have to do is clear the mist that beclouds his vision. Then, in a gesture of gentle efficiency, she gathered the skirt of her dress so that with its fabric, she could dry the tears from my eyes. They began a dialogue. I love this because the best pieces of literature that deal with suffering do not involve empathy. Or at least the empathy that we know. Oh, I'm so sorry. That's terrible. No wisdom teacher ever says that I can see. It's not that they don't feel it, but that's not the point. And so she begins arguing with him. We see this, of course, in the wonderful text, the book of Job from the Hebrew Bible, where Job, when God finally comes down, as Job has pleaded for him to do, the message is not one of comfort. It's like, who are you? Were you there when I created the world? What do you know? It's always this very brusque and blunt address to the suffering. So she begins to do that. Despite her empathy, she does have the empathy. She wipes his tears. She says, it's going to be all right. But look, are you stupid? I love this. So Boethius replies, says, look, you see the point that I'm driving at here about what I'm telling you about my situation. Instead of being rewarded for my actual virtue, I'm being punished for imaginary crimes. And no confession of a crime, however serious, ever found a jury so unanimous in the severity of their judgment, mollified neither by their understanding of general human weakness nor the impossibility of ever knowing the entire truth. If I had been charged with planning to burn down churches and murder priests, or to massacre all men of wealth and title, I would still have a right to either confess to it or to be called into the court for a hearing, and there found guilty. But here I am, almost 500 miles from home, condemned to death and all my property confiscated for having defended the Roman Senate, and without any right to speak in my own defense. And you know, oratory, rhetoric, was of value as one of the original 3 liberal arts for the Roman culture and its history. Whatever I may have done, I did not deserve to be treated this way and to have a charge leveled against me like this. Well, Lady Philosophy says, tell you the truth, you're confused. You're torn by grief and anger and self-pity, and each of these pulls you in a different direction. You ever been there? Me too. You're not yet ready for strong medicines. I'm afraid, you're not yet ready for strong medicines, I'm afraid. So we shall begin with something milder. How nice is that? Anodynes, so that the sore and angry places may be softened and soothed. Then perhaps we can begin the real treatment of your complaints. Take heart, she says, for there is still a spark of life in you that we can rekindle and restore so that it is a healthy fire. But we are not yet at that moment when we can resort to the strongest medicines. The way men's minds work is that when they lose sight of some correct opinion, false ones come in and take its place, and confusion arises, a kind of fog that obscures clear vision. I shall try to clear some of that fog for you, and then maybe you'll be able to see your way to the shining light of the truth that never dims. Now, this is 6th century. This is therapy, right? Only much harsher than we would ever imagine it. And yet, she's clear, empathetic to a degree, but not to the point where she will allow him to justify his feelings, because such feelings can never be justified, as we're going to see, because he's awash in the throes of fortune. And fortune gives a lot, takes away a lot, promises nothing. And so we come to our passage. Lady Philosophy to Boethius. Now, what is it that's actually upsetting you? And this is where she begins the soft medicine and then the strong medicine. And has driven you to such fits of weeping. You've had a sharp bump. Sharp bump? He's about to be executed. Okay. And you think that fortune's attitude towards you has changed. So here's really the gist of her argument, is you either follow Lady Philosophy or you follow Lady Fortune. And here's what's going to happen if you follow Lady Fortune. You think her attitude towards you has changed, but you're wrong. She hasn't changed it one bit. She was always whimsical. She remains constant in her inconstancy. You are wrong to take her smiles seriously. Oh, yes. And to rely on them as the basis for your happiness. There it is. You cannot base your happiness on something that's constantly shifting. Now, what you have learned is that the changing face of blind power is unreliable and always was. Other men may not understand this, but she has revealed herself entirely to you. If you want to be one of her followers, then follow, but without complaint. If you spurn her treachery, then reject her absolutely as one who plays such games with men's lives. You blame her for your sorrows, but your heart ought to be at rest, for now that she has left you, you know not to trust her, and no one will ever feel sure that she is not going to abandon him just as she abandoned you. This is an old notion that our suffering is caused by incorrect thoughts, by thinking that we can build happiness on something that is mutable, in fact, always changing. We're introduced to the Wheel of Fortune, which you may know about here in the book, in Book 2, as Book 2 continues. If you're trying to stop her wheel from turning, she said, Lady Philosophy says, you are the most obtuse. You are seeking to regain what really did not belong to you. Oh, there it is, right? There it is. Some good fortune happens to us. You become somehow president of an awesome university, and you think, I deserve that. Well, you didn't, but you can enjoy it while it happens, while it's there, because the wheel will keep turning. That sounds ominous. I don't mean that to be so ominous. I'm just talking about fortune. It applies the other way, too. Something horrible happens to you, and you think, this is about me, and I did this. No, you didn't. You're just a human being living on this planet. And if you want to attach the meaning you have to your life to that wheel, then it's going to be an amazing ride. It's going to be a hard ride, difficult ride. And I know people, I'm sure you do too, who do that. And I won't say it's not interesting. I did it for a while, and it's quite a ride, but it wears you down. Because it's false. Because it's false to assume that the benefits you get and the disadvantages you get mean anything about you. They're just fortune. You know, it comes and goes. I love Boethius because he's a philosopher and he does not let her go. So she says, look, Fortuna is there. during the conversation. Fortune herself is there. And she pipes up and says, hey, inconstancy is what I do. That's a little play with the translation. Inconstancy is my very essence. I didn't say anything otherwise. I am inconstant. It is the game I never cease to play, which is why we have a nice wheel, as I turn my wheel in its ever-changing circle. Yes, rise up on my wheel if you like, but don't count it an injury. Don't count it an injury when by the same token you begin to fall, as the rules of the game require. Isn't this what tragedy commemorates with its tears and tumult? And like I said, I love Boethius and I love Job because they don't roll over and they argue and they say, this is not right, I don't understand. You're wrong. This is Boethius responding to Lady Philosophy. What you've said is all rhetoric. It's a plausible series of high-sounding phrases. A man can listen to them and even be beguiled, but his sense of having been injured is much deeper than that. Oh, you see what he did? He declared his injury the ultimate reality. He's done. If he does that, he's done, and you're done, and I'm done. If we think our injury, our suffering, is the ultimate reality, it's over. His sense of having been injured lies much deeper than that. He listens to arguments and follows along, but the moment they stop, he's again reminded of the grief that gnaws at his heart. That's true, she said. But as you remember, this was not supposed to be a cure, only a kind of dressing for your wound, which is very tender. When the right time comes, there will be stronger medicines. Ah, genius, right? Because what happens when you're suffering is you want it to stop now. Future? I don't even know what you're talking about, the future. I hurt. Fix it now. All right, I put a little Band-Aid on it. But you got some work to do. And it's down that road, right? Beautiful, brilliant. And then she's like, he responds, okay, what you say is true enough. You who are the nurse of all the virtues know that I did enjoy, if briefly, a great prosperity. She says, hey, in the big picture, you've done all right. On Fortune's wheel, you've done all right. You were a Roman senator. And he says, but it is also true that the worst kind of misfortune, see, he keeps making these arguments, to Lady Philosophy. How's that going to turn out? But it is also true that the worst kind of misfortune is one that befalls someone who has previously known happiness. Bullshit, she said. Oh, wait, that's not the Latin, sorry. No, she says patiently, you're suffering because you have incorrect beliefs. How awesome is that? I love that because I can correct my beliefs, which means my suffering can cease. Okay. You, Lady Philosophy says to Boethius, you put all that emphasis on the vacuous idea of some happiness, some sense of fortuitous happiness. Even so, you still have to admit you did all right on Fortune's wheel. We're making progress, she says, one small step at a time. Oh, God, no. Make it go faster. At least you're no longer bewailing everything. No sympathy for the incorrect beliefs. You've begun to focus, which is a good thing. No promises either, right? It's difficult for both of us if you wallow in grief and universalize it. Oh, man. It's difficult for both of us, Lady Philosophy and Boethius, if you wallow in grief and universalize it. I don't know about you, but man, I have a Ph.D. in universalizing grief. In fact, I think that's what I use my Ph.D. for. It's like, I know all these stories of suffering. Oh, it's me. It's me. It's difficult for us both if you wallow in grief and universalize it, complaining that if you are not absolutely happy, then you must be absolutely miserable. All right, I want you to get in here. 2, so I'm going to just kind of summarize books 3 through 5. They actually get into the philosophical disputations here about the problem of evil, free will, etc. So instead of getting into all that, I think you know some of those arguments anyway. I'm just going to read you the opening. And so what happens is there are these poetic interludes with Boethius and sometimes Lady Philosophy. And so at the end of book 2, she does a wonderful song that illustrates, again, it's like the chorus in Greek tragedy. And book 3 opens like this. She finished singing, and the melody hung in the air, its sweetness still in my ears, which were eager for more. I waited a bit and thanked her. What wonderful comfort you offer with both your arguments and your poetry. You do revive me, so that I am no longer absolutely devastated by the blows of fortune, but seem at least for the moment to bear them. At any rate, I'm no longer terrified by the prospect of your strong remedies, whatever they are, but eager for you to administer them. I thought that might be the case, she said, because you were so absorbed and attentive. I'm happy to have brought you to this state of mind. The remedies, I must warn you, sting a little. But once you've absorbed them, they soothe. And you say you are eager, but if you knew where I were leading you, you would be, I think, even more eager. Where's that, he asked her. To that true happiness your soul dreams of but cannot see, because your sight is distracted by these fleeting images. Tell me, show me, I'm eager to know that true happiness. I beg you, let us proceed. And they do. And I'm going to end tonight with the voice of our founder, who has a magnificent lecture on Boethius. He sat right there and gave it, and it's over an hour, so we're not going to do that, but I think the last few minutes here are absolutely fantastic. And this is, as you can probably tell, this is near the end of his life. But he would sit there, and on Sunday mornings at 11, he would speak flawlessly for an hour without notes. There is a moment here at the end where he's talking about something brilliant. I mean, just brilliant stuff coming out of his mouth, and he's looking at his watch, and he's like clocking that. Okay, I'm going to speak like this. I'm going to issue this brilliance for another 3 minutes. He was amazing. Manly Hall, from a lecture titled The Love of Truth on Boethius.
We have to solve the problem if we wish to have peace. We must make one humanity if we do not wish to be divided. Now, if we continue to wish to be divided, we not only have the problems of society, but we have the problems of ourselves. The individual who has not transcended his own selfishness is a very poor candidate for reforming the world. It is necessary for each person to recognize that he must make a personal contribution to the integrities of things. He must become aware of truth, of the love of truth, of the love of God as truth, deity recognized in the manifested form of the infinite parent, also always solicitous for the good of its children. We must think of the faiths of men as being the gateways to conduct. We must think also of all the dreams and hopes of the ages and realize that they cannot be fulfilled until the individual loves truth better than he loves himself. There is no way of solving the problem unless we become aware of a strange and wonderful beauty, as Boethius saw it in his prison cell. A radiant being. We can call it peace. We can call it wisdom. We can call it love. We can call it whatever we want to call it. But it is a radiant power that blesses dedication, that rewards definite effort to perfect and to fulfill. It is something that can take over the life of the individual when he is no longer willing to dedicate that life to the fulfillment of his private ambitions. So with all these points, there is this wonderful opportunity that comes, which Boethius noted, and which is the love of truth. Now, love is a very careful word. Love to the average individual is a very physical word. Life and love to the theologian is an emotional experience. Life and love to the philosopher is an intellectual experience. But beyond this is the simple, direct fact of the love of truth. A love which does not require rationalization, does not require scientific proof, does not require anything but the evident fact that if we love peace, we will serve it. And if we serve peace, we will have peace. That if we serve and love truth, we will dedicate ourselves to truth. We will correct the curriculums of our schools. We will add knowledge to the courses necessary to instruct the young. And we will put ideals and principles ahead of profit and private enterprise. These things are the transformation of the love of truth as we know it today to the love of truth as it must be, a dedication to the fulfillment of the works of truth. Now, these works of truth are not simply strange things floating around in space somewhere, because truth, as Boetius found out, is a kind of being. It is something that lives but never dies. It is born but never ceases. In other words, it is almost actually another name for the human soul. But whatever we call it, it is the victory, the inevitable victory of good over evil. It is the complete victory of faith over fear. It is the complete victory of virtue over vice. And it is achieved because it is potentially possible to the individual. And each human being is born with the potential of the perfection of truth within himself. There is nothing that can prevent the individual from attaining truth except his own reluctance to improve his ways. Now, it's possible for him to realize that some of the truths that he must ultimately know are now beyond him. He's not going to be able to be perfect at the moment. He is not going to be able to be perfect as his Father in heaven is perfect. But he is going to be able to move forward step by step in a dedicated search for reality. The moment he starts these steps, the moment he begins to make an effort to direct and vitalize his own integrity, the journey towards reality begins. And in that moment, the light shining being of truth takes his hand and will lead him to eternity. And nothing can interrupt it. Nothing can prevent it. Nothing can have victory over the inevitable victory of reality over illusion. We have lived for a long time in illusion, and some of this illusion we call learned knowledge. We think of science as very wise. We think that science is solving everything. We think that Einstein was incredible when he found the formula for the atomic fission. These are not the truths we need. These are not truths at all. They are struggling with the misuse of universal potentials. The atom, the cell, all these things are each of them a unit. Each is a truth in itself, and it must be treated as one. It must be recognized, and if we wish to advance things, we must work together to make these various parts work together well in us. If we can make the cells of our own body cooperate, we have help. If we can make the various forms of knowledge to cooperate, we will have peace in the world. These things are part of our destiny. These things were well known to Plato and Pythagoras. They were well known to the foreign and Eastern nations. And everyone has realized that it is impossible to solve our present problem unless the individual himself moves from a theoretical standpoint and ceases simply about talking about how things should be done to the dynamic experience of personal growth. And this personal growth, he can start where he is. He doesn't have to worry about anything. What is his problem at the moment? Well, maybe it's a need of a job, or perhaps it is domestic difficulty. Perhaps it is a wayward child. We do not know what that is, but whatever it is, if at this time he has not found a footing in a pattern for his own permanent growth, that problem which he faces today must become that footing, or one of its equivalents. It must be something done by the individual himself to prove a sincere dedication to advancing the cause of common good. Once he makes one statement, the seed is planted. And once the seed is planted, it will never die. It leads, one good deed leads to others. One bit of wisdom leads to greater wisdom. One concept of the divine love of the God for man is fulfilled in the divine love of man for God. These things are all part of a wonderful mystery, truth in a mystery, love and wisdom in a mystery. All these things we have to face as coming to us in the course of years. So we can wait in our own way for the radiant woman who comes to the prison cell and says, you have served God all your life. You have been a good person, and you are not going to be deserted in your gray hairs. The good you have done to others comes back as a radiant being to lead you to the peace and security that you desire. Under those conditions, things will get done in a reasonable length of time.
Truth is a kind of being, and all the good you've done in your life returns to you in the form of this being who will not desert you. Thank you for your attention.